Okay, so today we are going to do guided notes for the Holocaust. This is what your notes should look like. You should be able to follow along exactly as I'm doing the presentation. If you need to pause at any point in time, you can, and if anything looks confusing to me, I will go back to the notes and show you where it is. So, the Holocaust was from 1933 to 1945. So that would be your first blank. There were 6 million Jews and 5 million non-Jews murdered. Why would Hitler do this? He picked up his anti-Semitism when he was in Vienna. He became friends with the mayor Karl Lueger, who was an anti-Semite. Anti-Semitic propaganda was rampant. That means all over the place in Vienna at the time. Hitler lived in Vienna from 1907 to 1913. Living in Vienna was some of the most difficult times in his life. He was rejected twice from the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts. The second rejection was the most traumatic experience for him, and his dreams were shattered. So, what was Hitler's final conclusion? In anti-Semitism, he found an explanation for his failures and sufferings, the Jews. So, according to him, the Jews were the single cause of his unhappiness and humiliation, and therefore they were the source of all evil in the world. So, Hitler kind of found a purpose for his life, which was cleansing the German race of the Jews. How would he do this? He does it in stages. So the first stage, which you'll notice is a blank on your notes, was social and economic discrimination. So in 1935, the Nuremberg laws were enacted, and that made Jews second-class citizens. From 1937 to 1939, Jews were banned from schools, restaurants, vacation spots, and certain sections of German cities. In addition to that, in 1933, Jews were forced out of government, university, law, medical, and school positions. Jewish businesses were boycotted, and Jewish businesses and properties were seized, or they were forced to sell their businesses at bargain prices. Something that I believe we already talked about was Kristallnacht. That occurred in 1938, and it's otherwise known as the Night of Broken Glass. This was when 7,000 Jewish businesses, 1,000 synagogues and homes were destroyed by Nazi thugs. There were 91 Jewish people murdered on that night, and 30,000 Jewish men were arrested and imprisoned. Business owners were ordered by the Nazi government to pay for damages. So that would be like somebody breaking something of yours, destroying it, and then saying you have to pay for the replacement. Stage two of the Holocaust was that all Jewish people were deported from all German occupied countries and forced into the ghettos. Life in the ghetto was overcrowded. There was a chronic shortage of food, leading to starvation. There was a lack of medical supplies and adequate clothing to deal with extreme cold. The plumbing broke down, and there was a lot of human waste and garbage thrown into the street, which led to epidemic outbreaks and high death rate amongst the residents. So really what the goal was to try and kill as many people as they could in the ghettos. So they crowded them on top of each other. There was starvation, there was no medical supplies, there was waste and garbage thrown out into the streets, which can all lead to a disease in a place where everybody is contained and confined. The conference. So this occurred on January 20th, 1942. It was a 90-minute meeting in the Wannsee district of Berlin. 15 high-ranking Nazi party leaders gathered to coordinate how to carry out, quote, the final solution to the Jewish question, end quote. The final solution was a code name for the deliberate, planned mass murder of all European Jews. So, how would they do it? At this point, you should be about here in your notes. So it was stages. On arrival, the Jewish people would go through a process called selection. Women, children, the old, and the sick were to be sent for special treatment, which typically meant death, but it might mean working. The young and fit would go through a process called destruction through work. So they used the young and fit people for all the work that they could get them to do, but then they also hoped that they would be worked to death. Shooting was too inefficient as the bullets were needed for the war effort, so typically the inmates were not killed by bullets. They'd rather save the bullets for war and kill them in other ways than use those bullets on the war effort. So Jews were rounded up and put into transit camps called ghettos, and the Jews that were living in the ghettos were to be used as a cheap source of labor. Sometimes they would build more ghettos or do any kind of work that the Nazis wanted them to. They were essentially enslaved to them. Conditions in the ghetto were designed to be so bad that many would die while the rest would be willing to leave these areas in hopes of better conditions. The remaining Jews were to be shipped to resettlement areas in the east. So a lot of what they did was through deception, hoping that they would find a place better than the ghettos. Many Jews willingly left the ghettos and they were shipped to resettlement areas in the east, which were typically your concentration camps. Okay, camps. There is a difference between these camps. So we have concentration camps. They held Jews, gypsies, political and religious opponents, homosexuals, and other Germans considered to be enemies of state. Those in concentration camps performed labor. They died by starvation, disease, and maltreatment. And the concentration camps were located in Germany. Death camps were extermination camps where people were murdered in an assembly-style line. The death camps were located in Poland, so we have Belchik, Sobibor, Treblinka, Majdanek, Chelemno, and the most famous of them all, Auschwitz-Birkenau. Okay, so the procedures when you got to a death camp. You went through arrival and selection. Men were separated from the women and children. They were sorted visually by the Nazi doctors. So the Nazi doctors took one look at people and decided whether they lived or died, essentially. 90% of people were sent to death, which is to the left, and 10% of people were kept to live. They did still use the young and healthy as forced labor in the death camps. What the Nazis tried to do was remove a sense of your identity, so they shaved off your hair. This would be probably particularly emotional for women. They tattooed a registration number on your left forearm, so instead of having a name, you were now a number. And they also made you take off all your clothes and give over all your valuables. This included any gold that was on your person, including gold teeth. This is a quote from a Holocaust survivor that talks about what the experience was like when she first got there, and she says that the shaving off of our hair was the most traumatic experience. It made me feel utterly vulnerable and reduced to a complete nobody. I had relinquished my clothes as well, and I stood there stark naked, bald, with a number on my arm. In the space of a few minutes, I had been stripped of every vestige of human dignity and become indistinguishable from everyone around me. So they took away her name. Essentially, they took away her hair, they took away her clothes, they took away anything that was valuable to her and made her no different than anyone else around her. So nobody had a sense of individuality once you were in the death or concentration camps. Things that went on at the death camps: children, pregnant women, elderly, handicapped, and the sick were sent to die. They were typically told that they were taking a shower, so they'd have to undress and enter the shower rooms. Some of the showers held about 200 people. They locked the doors and they used carbon monoxide for about a half an hour, and then Zyklon B, which is an insecticide, and that was used to suffocate them within 10 to 15 minutes. Typically, death camps could process 3,800 people at one time, and that meant that in one day, 15,000 people would die in those shower rooms. The Sonderkommando, they were in charge of removing the bodies, taking out any gold teeth, anything valuable, and bringing the bodies to be burned in the oven. It took about 20 minutes to burn 2 to 3 bodies, and then any other kind of identification that they had was disposed of. So there was no trace of these people. They were killed, they were burned, and so was their identification. So it's as if they never existed. Now we're going to talk about Auschwitz, which is the most famous death camp. Auschwitz was the largest camp. There was both concentration and death camps there. There was more than 1 million people that died there, and they had 4 large gas chambers, each capable of holding 2,000 people at one time. So this camp was the one that did the most damage. They were able to essentially, if they wanted to, get rid of 8,000 people at once. You put 2,000 people in each one of those gas chambers, and they were eliminated in a terrible, terrible way. At Auschwitz, children were generally killed upon arrival, and children that were born in the camp were generally killed on the spot near the end of the war. In order to cut expenses and save gas, the SS guards were ordered to place living children directly into the ovens or throw them into open burning pits. This happened frequently. This happened with people who were working. They forced people to kill fellow inmates by pushing them into burning pits that they were using to dispose of the bodies. Once the bodies had been disposed of, they disposed of you as well. So this is a really, really dark place and had a lot of terrible things going on. Additionally, there were some medical experiments that went on. This part is light on the notes, so I'm just going to be doing some talking. There were terribly cruel medical experiments that were done at the camps. Men, women, and children were used as subjects. Inmates were put into pressure chambers, tested with drugs, castrated, frozen to death, and exposed to other traumas. And supposedly, these experiments were to find better medical treatments for German soldiers and airmen. Many people died during the experiments, and others were killed after the research was over and their organs were removed for further study. One of the most famous doctors who did experiments was the Angel of Death, Dr. Mengele. So Mengele did many things. If you are faint of heart, you may not want to listen to this. He took 14 gypsy twins and put them to sleep, and then he injected chloroform into their hearts, which killed them instantly, and he began dissecting and noting every piece of each twin's body. He supervised an operation in which 2 gypsy children were sewn together to create Siamese twins, and their hands became badly infected. When they had been reconnected together, he often injected chemicals into the eyes of children in an attempt to change their eye color. And Mengele's special pathology lab was located next to the crematorium. He made experimental surgeries from one twin to... He did experimental surgeries without anesthesia. He did blood transfusions from one twin to another. He tested reactions to various stimuli, and he injected people with lethal germs. He did sex change operations. He removed organs and limbs, and he participated in incestuous impregnations. That's it for part 1, so I'm going to pause here and load this to YouTube.